Okay, well, we'll vote.
All right, Sorella.
Justice Commission is now resumed.
Thank you, Uncle. I realise I was reminded by one of my very observant commissioners. We don't, in your statement, have a statement of who your people are, Uncle.
I am of the Nire Mullet clan, I prefer Dulwurrung, whilst they call themselves Tanarung. That the difference is I was doing it before they were born, most of the ones that end up calling it the Tanarung. I prefer Dulwurrung because I believe it to be the proper spelling, like Boirawung, Dulwurrung, Jar Jar Wurrung.
No, the spelling is controversial, and even within our clan name, there's like Dad and I vary in how we spell our clan
Yes,
names,
well.
whereas we both spell our nation the same. So language is a...
And I joke that Nire Mullet means cave people, because that's what it says, live in the hills or mountains. And I joke that it means actually I'm an original hillbilly, an Aboriginal hillbilly before they even had the term. My family grew up thinking they were Yura Yura because of where we were placed, or they were placed, which is on Cumragunja. So half my family are definitely Yura.
They married.
My mum and my grandmother did not marry into any of them lines, so our family ended up only being the only one. It's like an uncle of mine come up and said, "Don't worry, nephew, yous are covered in our claim, you're." I said, "Can't be, Uncle. Mum didn't marry one of yous, nor did Nan, so we can't be one of yous." And then they checked, they go, "Oh shit, you're right, but you were our early." I said, "Yeah, I'll still say you're early."
So, Uncle, I thought we would start on a really huge topic while we're all fresh, and it's the work that you did in setting up the Stolen Generations Inquiry. Could you tell the commissioners about how that work started and how the whole idea for the inquiry started?
Well, before the inquiry and anything got off the ground, I had at the time been working with a QC named Ron Merkel through the legal service days. And I had discussed with him and another brother of his who passed away, and as I say, I don't like mentioning their names. They both were aware. Now, they were called up to a conference in the Northern Territory where it was a legal service conference, the Northern Territory Legal Service organised. And up there, Ron Merkel heard these people from the Northern Territory, including the woman Cabillo, Francesca Cabillo, and all these other older people.
Jackie Cantona.
No, I'm not getting to her yet. I'm saying the older people. Uncle Fred, Kruger, Auntie Mae Briggs, not my Auntie Mae Briggs, but Auntie Mae Briggs up there, and about 3 other people, and then the Northern Territory Aboriginal Legal Service representative, and a woman who now works at the VU, named Jackie Cantona, and she was their, Jackie's a sort of either public relations or political analysis for them. And so we had a meal, and they found they weren't getting the gravity in Northern Territory of acceptance. So we're talking about it. And me coming in dressed like a lout, while they're all wearing shirts, ties, whatever, looking good, while I'm looking like I just dragged off the street. Isabel was with us, and her mum, and we sat and had lunch, and I said, okay. And they told me about what they wanted to do, and I turned around to them and said, okay, I think I can help. What do you want? Do you want to make it a national thing, or do you want... I said, well, we think it needs to be a national thing for us, because most of the Northern Territory was under Commonwealth control. For us to get it, it has to get up to be a national level. I gone, okay, I can handle that. And they all looked at me dubiously because of the way I was dressed and everything. And I mean this, they looked at me dubiously. And Jackie Katona, who had dealt with me and my cousins when we were getting into national death in custody, and they looked at her and she turned around and said, yes, he can do it. Trust him, he can do it. So, I went to some meetings. Back in them days, the organisations had a community meeting. Everyone was entitled to go, and everyone was entitled to ask a question. So I put my hand up about stolen gems. Within 2 weeks, Snake come up to me because they'd been up at the Northern Territory Conference, and said to me, look, you're right, this needs to go national. So they took me up to Watson, where the New South Wales Snake headquarters was, and we had the discussion there. I came back down to Melbourne because the other organisations like VACA had decided to get someone, and the Health Service decided to get someone. I think that was the start of campaigning. But to get the inquiry...
Can I interrupt Dad and just read this out from yours and then I'll shut up? In the meantime, more stolen generations were... This is from Dad's testimony at 59. In the meantime, more stolen generations were raising their voice as well. For example, Lynn Austin and Neville Austin. There were others too, of course. And then further on he notes that he may have forgotten some names, but that is only due to time, not due to the efforts or the impact that other members of the community had.
So, as it started grounding, grinding out that, yes, there was a lot more people it happened to, the organisations decided to have a few community meetings about it. Again, at each one I always spoke up. So you've got to understand my role then, and this is what a lot of people in the organisations never understood. They always seen me as the street punk. They always seen me as one of the party leaders. That meant, well, I'm not going to mention the name of the woman because she's got Alzheimer's, but you've already interviewed her. She said to me back at the time, Larry, the organisations are never going to trust you enough because your loyalty to the parties, and that scares them. And it wasn't my loyalty to them, it was their loyalty to me.
Solidarity, yeah?
It was both ways. It was not one or the other. So, we raised it. I raised it with what was ATSIC, and the chair of ATSIC at the time, and I were, to put it politely, we sometimes argued over what was right or wrong. I'll give him credit. He was one of those people that soon as the government give him a rule book on behaviour, he would work out a way to use it. So I'll give him credit. The organisation he ran at the time, he knew how to make sure it worked to the government's satisfaction. He thought I belonged to a certain branch of the family, Walsh, because there are a few scattered branches. There's some at Swanhill, for instance, there's some in Gippsland, Mildura, Murray Morwell. Let's not go into all the suburbs.
We're all across the state.
Because Mum was one of 13. So,
Yeah, our women are, we have good hips, let's put it that way.
anyway, where was I? Oh, yes. So, we started talking, and unfortunately, because of the situations with the organisations at the time, I don't know how to do it without not getting polite. There were 3 factions. And because of it, when you tried to get coordination on what was going on with Stolen Gens, it was hard because they weren't communicating with each other, let alone with me. Let alone having community meetings to talk to the Stolen Gens, to try and get us all together so that we could work on the same page.
And Uncle, when you say us, from your witness statement it becomes clear that in fact that whole time you were supporting other people to give their evidence to that process, but in fact you haven't shared your own story for your own sake until now.
Well, this is one of the mistakes we made, was that because of the lack of coordination between each other, and I mean between the Stolen Gens and the 3 major Aboriginal organisations, we had no clue what their plans were, and they had no clue what our plans were. It even goes down to the submissions the organisations put in. I don't know what they wrote in any of them.
Look, Dad, paraphrase.
Bells, please. I'm trying to do it my way.
Yeah, this is your words.
Yeah, but let's do it my way first.
Okay, you're the boss.
But what happens is, and I'm glad now it happens, it was one of those mistakes we made at the time, we didn't have counsellors for people who were going to go before these things to bear their pain to the commissions. The commissioners had counsellors. We didn't. There was never any discussion with us to see if this is what we might need or things that we could push for, because the organisations were having more meetings with the bloody Royal Commission than we were. And so there was a disconnect with what we wanted answers for and what we wanted to achieve and what the organisations wanted to achieve.
But Uncle, you also indicate that that meant that you were all having to provide trauma support for each other when you each really needed it for yourselves.
Yeah, well...
Can I read out your own words?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
64. Again, acknowledging that understanding has changed about trauma and trauma-informed practices and responses, I still have to acknowledge that it wasn't like that then, was my father's words at 64. People needed support to go in and tell their stories, practical support, emotional and mental health support. This wasn't available, so our community made do, as we usually do, with each other. This meant that members of our community, mostly black, but also including some wonderful allies, were the ones swooping in to provide support, holding someone's hand while they cried, bearing witness to the depths of someone else you knew and often loved trauma, all whilst reliving your own trauma, which relates to the testimony of other Stolen Generation survivors. It affected me. It still does to this day.
When I got to the Royal Commission, when it was my turn to tell my story, I did not. Because during the struggle to get it up, I lost friends. Some even before it started. Some were involved in the deaths in custody, friends and family.
He means that his friends passed.
And they had no one to speak for them. So I did. It hurt like hell because no one else was going to do it for me. They were my mates. They were brothers. They were sisters. They'd make it. Someone had to talk for them. So I chose to forgo talking about myself. Because they were it, they helped, they backed, they, at the risk of raising their own pain, supported. They, as I say, some just didn't survive their own nightmares. But they were bloody great mates and great brothers and sisters because we'd been through the same things. We understood it. It's like we and everyone in the organisations were saying to me, how in the hell did you get them to do it? The Parkers and I had a discussion about the younger ones that were living on the streets. So we started putting a, what do you call those things? We demand things. Petition to ask for the Housing Board to change its housing policy to include young people housing, because they didn't have that at the time. So we got that done. And why did we do it? Because we didn't want those kids ending up like us. We fought. Not for us, for them. So they didn't end up like us. So there's a chance they could get housing. There's a chance someone could be there to help them get used to budgeting and things like that. Which, by the way, we did. I got 2 houses from... I went to Youth Affairs, which was the Victorian Government Youth Advisory Board, and they had... It's funny, but non-Aboriginal had youth housing, non-Aboriginal had old people's housing, non-Aboriginal had thing. We only had family housing. So, had to change the constitution, got the 2 houses. I then declared them sovereign because we refused to pay rent while I was in charge of them for 3 years. So, well, no, this is the houses they owe us. They all learned to be good budgeters, and every one of them, those kids, apart from 1 or 2 who obviously, you know, if you've got a few, there's always going to be 1 or 2 that fall to the wayside, as in go back to whatever bad habits. But the majority became very good citizens of the Aboriginal community. All they needed was a break. We, the Parkies, gave them the break. We fought for it for them. And that was the same with this Royal Commission. We were together, we were able to work some strategies together, but when it come to the organisations, they didn't want to deal with us because we were the alkies, the junkies, the troublemakers. And I am saying we, because I was viewed the same way, because I was viewed... And yet I had organisations come up to me going, I don't know how you got them to do that. I didn't. We were just in the park yarning and they said, see those kids over there? Yeah, they've got nowhere to live. We've got to do something about that. They could end up like us. That's the same with Stolen Gens. We went through this shit. We want something done and we're willing to back you up. It got so bad, I heard at least 8 other stories apart from my own. I could not go home until my children were asleep in bed. I would leave before my children were awake. I had to contain my own emotional anger, not from my own story, but from other stories that gave them the courage to speak. And I had to stay the rock,
But Uncle,
the
you,
solid, unmovable one, and then go, hey, quick, you, that one, grab them quickly. Can't you see they're about to break down? And that happened for the whole 4 or 5 days. At the end, after it was over, 2 brothers, I'll say one of the brothers was held more professional boxing titles than any other. He didn't make world champion, but he had Commonwealth champion, Pacific champion, Asia Pacific champion, and his brother. They seen this distress I was in. I couldn't take it home. Those boys grabbed me, the Parkies. We went into a bunch of flats. We stayed. We partied hard. Yeah, I may have used a few illegal substances. But after the 4th day, I gone, yeah, I'm okay now. And one of them looked at me, he said, you sure, Bruz? He says, Bruz, they haven't beaten me fucking yet and they're not gonna now. And that we had a hug and because they knew I was all right.
Uncle.
So that's what I mean about the loyalty between us and why we fought together. Not out of me being the leader, but out of what happened to us. We didn't want it to keep going. We did not want another generation going through what we went through. You know,
The greatest sadness is it's still going on.
that's the worst part of it. For everything we fought, even despite ATSIC submissions, the organisation submissions, which I never got to read, which I really feel that was their. If we worked together and instead of having 3 or 4 different bloody demands, it may have worked better. If the legal service is demanding this or that happen, health service is demanding this or that happens, ACCA is demanding this or that happen, VAI, as in Victorian Aboriginal Community Services thing, VACSI, all had their own submissions, and I'm not even sure half of them matched each other. That was about their own power struggles and interfering in communities' business. And I mean that seriously. Interfering in communities' business by claiming they're the community. And it still continues to this day, instead of people like when I was young would go in and demand meetings with ministers and get them, we had these people speaking on our behalf with their submissions, which half the time was more about giving me more money and we'll handle this problem, which is bullshit. It was about sitting with us, working out what we felt were the major needs, sitting with us so we could appoint our own committee to represent us. It's like the latest example was I joined, thanks to the Aboriginal Legal Service, the inquiry last year that the state government on Aboriginal compensation and all that. And what I found was that I was dealing with bureaucrats that do not make decisions. So every time you go, okay, this is what we want, they go, oh, we'll have to take it upstairs. And then they get back to you, oh, they said no. You can't be angry at the little bloody shits they sent to you, the public servants ones they sent, because they were not the decision makers. They were the screen, so that you couldn't blame or know who was behind the decisions. When I was young, and we had a committee that wanted to meet with the government, we met with the government. We didn't have bloody bureaucrats interfering. We didn't have people who can't make decisions interfering. Where that broke down also is that Aboriginal organisations joined political parties because they thought that would give them more influence and more voice. They actually have been defeating the system that worked for the previous 30 years, whereas independent people, independent decision-making by our communities was what was raised by our people to the heads of government. That no longer happens. We have too many gatekeepers now, and the Aboriginal organisations are part of the gatekeeping problem. They're talking with the ones that are making decisions, and they're just going, oh, you know, bros, we're on your side, you're on our side because you're part of our party now, and we can only give you X amount. Bullshit. If you'd bought them from the beginning, you'd have got a lot more. Instead, you got conservative, you forgot why you were there, you forgot how many people fought before you to get you there, and you forgot it's not about your organisation, it's about us, our communities. And this is where you let down the stolen gens. Now, we also let each other down. I am not going to say that it's all their fault. We, because of our individual pains, could not see that we needed to join together. Well, I would say the Parkies understood because we'd all been there and we'd all knew each other from them places. So we understood each other. But a lot of people's individual pain, my pain is different from your pain. Your pain is different from their pain. Your pain is different from her pain. Your pain is different from his pain. It's because of the circumstances of your life that the pain's different. And it's what stopped us from getting together. We've got to learn, and I'm sick and tired of saying, are you learning yet? Until you unite, you are always going to lose. Until you, stolen gens, unite, form a team that you think could handle your issues and your concerns, we are always going to the organisations who only see it from their perspective. Most of the people in the organisations were raised in happy families. You know, one of the reasons I am critical of some of the organisations is they don't allow people like me in. I mean, they allow me in because I've been around too long and I'm too stubborn to back off. But it's a lot of us that they don't allow in because we aren't their idea of respectability. I am betting that if I ever get in that Premier's list, it'll be somewhere where after I'm dead in another 30 or 40 years. Because the people running it are looking at respectability people. It's like NAIDOC Award. I've seen it being given to public servants. You know what NAIDOC Award was about? The people that volunteered, the people that tirelessly worked in our communities to assist our communities. It wasn't about a reward for someone that worked in an organisation. It wasn't about a reward for someone that worked in the government. It was about a community member contributing to our community to help strengthen our community. Not the crap it is. I was asked if I wanted one, and I refused. I was asked if I wanted to be on the Premier's thing, and I refused. Why? Because I know if I'm put up now, as I am, I'll be knocked back. I know it'll be after I'm dead where someone will go, oh, actually, when you look back at what he did, he wasn't a bad bloke. That will be the only way I'll get in that bloody thing, while the current people are after respectable people. Everybody knocks the people I'm associated with. I'm not saying they're all good. I'm not saying that they haven't got problems. I'm not going to lie about them. But they also know I'll tell the truth about them, that they did stand behind me 100%. Yes, there was dissent, like anything. Yes, we allowed for other people to have their own opinions because it wasn't a dictatorship, or it wasn't that thing that a lot of organisations do. Yeah, I know you're against it, but we need all of you to say yes. So let's raise our hand. We voted on this.
I need the mic for the live stream.
Oh, sorry.
It's for the version.
So let's raise our hand and vote on this. Oh no, you've got to vote yes too, you know. We've got to make this look like the board's all together as one. That was started in 1982, and I'm not going to name the two organisations.
And it happened to
But
me
I'm in
2 years
the,
ago.
I'm in one of their old houses, is one of them. This has happened too many times. This is the problem. I'm sick of it. And I'm sick and tired of people telling them rumours and lies to stop them from uniting. You know, when I was on this committee, someone who I go into was telling other people stolen generations. I was earning lots of money from these meetings. This was to decide the package. Bloody hell. For over 12 months, all I earned was about $400. But someone tried telling them I was earning a lot more than that and said, look, just because he's been doing this and that, the stolen generation, he's getting lots of money. There are too many people telling you people lies. There are too many people that need you to be divided. It's about time you got off your bloody mums and realise you are being used so that nothing changes. And that is not on me, that's on all of us. Because yous are so caught in your own pain, just like I am, just like I go through it every day for 20 years, and not just the stolen gens, I'm talking about all my physical pains, I still believe we can win. I still believe if you mob stop bitching at each other, we could win. You need to find a way to work together. You need a way to support the current team that I'm not rejoining, because I am not dealing with bottom-end bureaucrats. I never did when I was young. I never did in my middle age. And why the hell should I, in my 60s, have to deal with bureaucrats who can't make decisions when I used to deal with you who made decisions.
Uncle,
Yes.
I want to move from one really very important and difficult subject to another very important and difficult subject, because we haven't yet spoken about deaths in custody. And you had some really, very personal experiences with that process, but also, as with everything else that's happened to you in your life, you use that those very personal losses to then spur you on to make changes and to organise your community. And I wondered if you'd speak a bit about that.
Well, you see, I say in the story that I was at home working because I had a family support when I call them brother cousins because we called each other brothers, cousins for stuff we were doing together. Now, my two cousins were well-known political activists in the political activist world. Same last name as me. I got a phone call from one of them. And he said, Uncle, and as I say, I don't like, but I'll use the family names. Uncle Moffat died. Yeah, okay. Me brother will pick you up in half an hour. We'll wait for you to get here. So we got there. The Walsh family were there, and the Moffat family were there waiting for us. When we got there, we put down the questions we wanted to know. What was he picked up for? Why was he picked up? Why didn't anyone check that he had a heart condition? Why was there no checking on him in the police cells? Why? We asked all these questions. We got what answers we could. We then called a community meeting, and I mean every one of the Gunai Kurnai in that area, and even all the way down to Tyres, turned up to the meeting, the families. They all came and they asked us what we found out. And they said, what's the next step? So we formed a committee to look at all the issues and how we could make it a headline. So we organised a demo where we blocked the courts of the police station, handing out pamphlets. And it forced the courts and the inspector or whatever he was of police to agree to have a community meeting. At that community meeting, before we had it, we all sat down to make sure everyone was comfortable with the idea and who wanted to speak and have a say, so that we could organise it to how it would go through, whether the police or the courts. There was this old guy, God, he must have been bloody 70 or 80 back then, you know. He's gone, nephew, I want to get up and say something. No worries, uncle. And he's always been a really soft talker, this man. He's passed away, so. But he was also one of the people that were teaching the Gunai Kurnai their craft at art patterns. He was older than the other fellow from that era after that. So we got it. We went and did, started to try and create police liaison, court liaison, so that some of this arrest rates could be stopped and some of the deaths may be preventable. So my cousins were starting to look at, because, as I said, my cousins were pretty well known in their day. I mean, one's nickname was Have Demo, Will Travel. No, that was our nickname for him. It was our, you named the demo, with which state? No, it was never Black Panther, although he associated with a few of them. You named the demo, he was there. So they started having a look while I went back to work because I had a family to raise. Then, whilst I was working, a cousin of mine came in and she looked upset. And before she got near me, she burst into tears. And she said, "I'm sorry, your brother was found dead last night at the police station." I was working at the Koori Heritage Trust at the time. I just turned around to Jim and said, "Yeah, I heard, Larry. Take as long as you like." So we went up there. Now, as I say, my cousin with the nickname Hab Demo Will Travel, and I went up. So we heard the story. So we went to the police station, not the police station, the pub where they arrested him. And we stayed there after closing because for the first time in a long time, I let my anger out. And my cousin didn't mind a fight neither. And when the police came to try and throw us out, I just told them, "Come forward and try and arrest me."
He was picking a fight.
And my eyes went red. And so they retreated and had to go get my recently widowed sister-in-law to try and get us to calm down. I mean, she's just found out her bloody husband's grieving. She's grieving because she's just lost her husband and the father of her children. And
Which one was a baby at the time?
which one was a baby at the time. And instead of just go away or whatever, or just come take us on, they went running to get a person grieving to stop us.
May have worked, but Dad did not approve of it.
I almost still kept going, but cousin Desi was watching my sister-in-law's reaction and he's like, come on, calm down. Calm
As
down.
my father
Let's
puts it
leave."
here, she didn't need anything more of anything that evening, so we agreed and went home to my nieces and nephews.
So I got Reed back involved. And I, thanks to my cousins, because of their political activities, they started asking around the state and interstate how many of this was happening. So my cousins and I went up to Queensland to see what the Desi custody there on the way back to New South Wales, to see what was happening there, and then to try and create in our states the movement to call for a Royal Commission. Most people don't remember me, and I'm okay with that because I'm not a public figure. I'm a great planner, I'm a great networker, but I'm not a public figure. Because I've seen too many public figures who are asked to make comments on things they know nothing about, and they make these comments because, "Oh, I'm in the papers again." I'm not that type of person. It's why I prefer storytelling, because it means you can pass through things without anyone noticing you or seeing you as a person involved in something political or something social justice type things. Storytelling is one of the best disguises I ever found, because people talk to you about stories, but sometimes they talk to you about their lives, and you sometimes start to get a picture of what's going on and what needs to change. Storytelling is not the art of telling a story, it's the art of listening. See, I used to say to people when I used to do radio, I know you're hearing what I'm saying, but are you really listening to what I'm saying? Because they are, see, everyone thinks hearing is the art. It's not. The art of hearing is listening, to hear where there's a pause, to hear where there's a change in tone, to see the way they hold their body tells you what they're really saying. The art of listening is one of the most forgotten arts in the world. Because too many people are trying to talk over each other rather than use the art of listening. And I say, not an actor's not bad at watching someone and then developing a character that they have to use for a play. I'm saying a storyteller actually has a sense of listening that most people don't even notice. I mean, that's why I've been able to get away with a lot of things, because everyone either dismisses me as a street lout or, oh yeah, he's a storyteller. In the old days, the storyteller was the oral historian. Every story I tell, I can name where that bloody story happened. That's the art of storytelling in the traditional sense. Not just saying, here's the story of the old days, but to be able to go, this is where that happened. This is how it happened. And sometimes, whether you realise it or not, I'm talking about earthquakes. I know what I'm talking about earthquakes, but nobody else does. I know I'm talking about volcanic eruptions, but nobody else does.
Flood and famine.
Because they're thinking it's a story. It's not a story, it's an actual history. And it's all put into stories so that they are remembered from generation to generation. I'm a storyteller, and I want the generations of the future to know what we achieved so they can take it the next step.
And Uncle, before you, Granny Annie has been doing the same thing. She's been telling the stories.
Granny Annie was recorded as helping a lot of the Aboriginal women on Corranderk write their submissions, those that couldn't write. And Granny Annie also testified at the Corranderk inquiry.
I was going to say she very famously, and it feels very famous because it's like in my family, but I'm like, maybe it's just famous to us. I don't know. But she testified. She was really brave, actually. She testified not just about herself, but primarily about our great uncle David, who he was sick, and she didn't have enough food rations, and she was requesting extra blankets because David was sick, and David died as a result of them refusing to give her blankets and more food rations, and so Granny Annie was moved to be one of the only women that was actually included in the Corranderk inquiry. The other thing that I will say
Plus
about...
she wrote on behalf of 5 or 6 of the women who couldn't write properly.
Indeed.
Their testimony.
She also wrote down language words for not just her own language, but other language groups around her. And the other thing that's really special about Granny Annie that I relate to particularly, but I think that Dad is trying to walk in her footsteps as well, or in a different regard. Well, so Granny Annie was given a unique position in that she could move inside more circles than the average bear. She was able to move inside men's and women's circles, and that's because my great-great-great-grandfather, her husband, he had been in an axe fight when he was young. His name was Taljum Hamilton, and Taljum means speaker. So he was
After that throat job, he could speak.
He was a designated speaker, though, in our family, and a designated role as speaker. However, Annie could understand him perfectly. So he would just talk. So Annie was able to actually participate in men's ceremonial business, not because she was participating as herself, but because she was her
Translating
husband's
for her
translator. So I suppose Dan and I have talked about this as us trying to follow her footsteps, in the sense of us both also standing up against racism and harsh treatment and inequality. But more than that, the same way she, in just her very, like, in the very places she was put in, she expanded sort of circles and knowledge and discussion. You know, that's what we're attempting to do with our testimony. Every part of our testimony we've been very deliberate with, and Dad, I've been very proud of him. He made it really clear to me that he didn't want this document to have any wallowing in it, that it wasn't about telling the sad things that had happened to him for no point or purpose, that every story that we were going to tell was going to have a purpose and a point to show how systemic discrimination had occurred across our lives.
And
Can
in
I
terms
also-
of those systems,
Can I also say about Granny Annie? Granny Annie and her two brothers. Granny Annie was one of the only registered midwives in both New South Wales and Victoria.
And his storytelling, that's just Granny Annie's brother, Mudgeelong, in a heart nut.
And her brother was a storyteller, but
There's other things too.
they were also the healers. And it's a thing that I believe in, that not this bullshit physician here myself, but I believe that we have, all of us, for the last 8 generations, suffered some form of mental or emotional, whether it be inherited by the parents being the first generation being locked up because we were used to being free, to the way people were moved around from mission to reserve to break down families. There is a lot of, we need to, while we need to fix the stolen gens and the deaths in custody, we need to take a longer, harder, long-term look at the effects of colonisation much better than we do. For instance, can you imagine living free, roaming your land, then being put in chains and moved to somewhere else whose country you didn't belong to, so you had no right of say, no right of doing something without the consent of the local people, who were also being forced into the same position as you. And over time, luckily, those mobs got along. But some of the areas where we used to meet to settle differences, well, let me see, in one place it became a church, but it was where Aboriginal people went to settle their differences. The white fellas turned it into a church or a town hall. Wherever Aboriginal were meeting for ceremony, the white fellas built a church or a bloody town hall.
But it hasn't
was just-
stopped there, and
it
that's what
hasn't
your
stopped.
testimony shows, is that
It's
the process,
just-
colonisation is a dirty fucking beast that does not end. It is an active process. It didn't end in 1883, it is going on now, and Dad's testimony attests to how the effect of colonisation is borne out on his body, and mine attempts to address that in support of Dad's.
If you look very carefully at the coroner records and most every mission reserve record, you will find people were removed, just like the stolen gens. You will find that people were forced to live elsewhere that had nothing to do with their country, their knowledge of their country, forced to move away. In some cases, I sometimes have a yarn with Jiri dancers and Mandy Nicholson, and that because Mandy and I have discussed this idea that the whole thing is, and this is why I am a little bit anti-logging and a little bit anti
Only a little bit,
things. I'll say a little bit for the moment, because that's where our inheritance comes from. That's where our whole, you know how they talk about Aboriginal sites and we'll protect this Aboriginal heritage? That's a lie. The site means nothing without what was in the area around it. I mean, if you're going to a ceremony for a few days, where in the hell's all your food coming from? Where's all your tools for the ceremony coming from? Where's all the ochre for the ceremony coming from? It's not just stopping the dance, but it's also not recognising the interrelationship between whatever the ceremony was and why you were there. For instance, I know Stu here shares a story with me because the creation of fire, that shares between Tanarong and Wurundjeri Woiwurrung.
Oh, many more. It's a full
Yeah,
story.
yeah, but I'm saying there are instances of that. But you know what? I'm not allowed to go into Sue's area to start that story, and she's not allowed to come into mine and finish that story. Why? I'm sorry, someone's got to own it. You can't share it, even if the story is your shared story. No, one of you has got to own it. It's everything to break our cultural links, our kinship links, and even today, you know the biggest trick they got? Oh yeah, here's your Cultural Heritage Act. Oh, we've got a Forestry Act. Separate them when they're part of the one. They're playing games with us and forcing us to play the same game. My culture and heritage and my inheritance is the whole damn Tanarong bush, the whole of those river systems. And if you took out the lands, all these buildings, Wurundjeri Woiwurrung would claim the same. My area is all this area where there used to be forests, where there used to be ceremony, where we had plenty of waterways. It's the same story throughout Victoria. I'm not saying I'm going to tell the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung story, I'm just using the example because I'm here. It's the whole system is set up to find ways of forcing us to behave their way rather than ours. I should not have to argue that my inheritance, the whole Nire Bullock area, the whole of the creation of the Goulburn River, the whole of the creation of the King River and a couple of other rivers is part of my culture and my heritage, but more important, it's one word the white fellas won't use with us. My inheritance. Passed down from my ancestors all the way through to me and to my children. And that every Aboriginal has that. It's just that we're not using the right word because they're training us to go heritage instead of inheritance. Inheritance has a different legal meaning to heritage. And I'm sick and tired of us being fooled by scaly back devil dodgers.
Dad,
Do you want a translation of that one?
No, I reckon let them sit with it and work it out on their own, eh? Dad's so very eloquently put this thought. He's been thinking about this thought a lot, right? So, I've heard it a bit because I live with him. So, you know, Heath hears my thoughts too. So lucky him. But this is one of the most eloquent ways that I've heard him say it. So I just want to read it. If we lose our unique landscapes, animals, waterways and plants, that is a loss both to me culturally and to my heritage, but also to the heritage and culture of everyone who calls my country home. If I lose my heritage, you lose yours. If the bush goes, so too does the romanticism and mysticism that non-Aboriginal Australia viewpoint. If the bush,
Australians.
sorry, it's me, not Dad. He's eloquent in here. I'm not. If the bush goes, so too does the romanticism and mysticism within the non-Aboriginal Australian view of the Australian bush. There simply won't be another Banjo Patterson if our land is not protected, and its beauty can't be wondered and pondered by an artist. There are many, many more losses that I could list from the degradation to our environment and heritage that will occur if nothing is done. But he sort of hasn't.
The
Interesting time.
examples I use now and then is the Heidi School of Art. No more Bush, no more Heidi School of Art. May Gibbs of Gumnut Dole fame and Advanced Australia Fair, there'll be no future May Gibbs. CJ Dennis, there'll be no future CJ Dennis.
See, this is
The
what I love
man
about my
from
father.
Snowy River,
I love that example.
you know,
This is what I love
no
about my
more
father.
myth like
Is
that.
he has come up. Well, he's trying to fit language so that, you know, this is at this particular viewpoint. Obviously, is actually like for non-Aboriginal people. He's trying to educate through that viewpoint, and I love him for attempting to do that. I love him for attempting to put his own framework and give it over to someone so that they can see value in it when they might not have before.
Isabel, I think I might. Yes.
But can I make one more comment on that one?
Could
Because
I
it
just
is
say as a
important.
non- as a
You see, the
non-Aboriginal
thing
person-
is, what I've
Please
been
don't.
talking to people about is they say to me, oh, how do you want me involved? And I go, well, all I want you to do is talk about your country, your heritage and your inheritance. Because if every Aboriginal started doing that, we would change the debate on Aboriginal heritage and environment. And what's more, if any of you non-Aboriginal out there, I also am being generous as an Aboriginal to say that is also part of my heritage. It may only have existed for 150 years.
For use, but we're
But-
going to share.
We are all people who at one stage or another have watched on TV, heard the song or heard the poem, The Man from Snowy River. We have all heard of Gumnut Dolls. We have all heard of, well, actually more New South Wales, but we have
You
Mulga
made
Scrub
the
here.
Gibbs point. We got her.
No, but Mulga Mick of Henry Lawson and them, because we have Mulga
Oh,
Scrub.
Lawson as well, yeah.
So you see what I'm getting at is that we have been fighting these wars alone when I'm saying to people, it's quite simple. I as an Aboriginal and the ones that have joined me on this, we're not about to shoot your heritage down. We will acknowledge that part of your heritage is also part of ours. So we need to combine the Heritage Acts and the Environment Acts to make Australia's heritage permanent. And that's where I tell you, sometimes people say, oh, he's mad, he's got this crazy idea, but they all have a grain of truth and they are easy to do. It's just that we are so busy holding on so tightly to whatever we're being told is at risk, rather than looking about how do we span it so it's not at risk.
Remember before we
We have got to defeat the government by using the non-Aboriginal arts to defeat government, to get what I want. I don't want to make deals with the devil. I am saying, if I am Australian and you're Australian, then that is your heritage and it is also part of mine. I have a longer heritage and a longer history.
But if mine dies, yours certainly
Mine
will.
dies, yours dies. Full
Commissioner
stop.
Bell, did you
That's
want
it.
to?
Yeah, I was going to say.
As a non-Aboriginal person, I just wanted to thank you for the beautiful words that you spoke, for reaching out to people like me, for emphasising how important it is, not just for you but for us, that you protect country and speak for country, for inviting me to think about country in a new way, for inviting me to understand that we need to join up your inheritance with heritage and protection of country. And I just wanted to say to you that these ideas are very powerful in my mind, and I'll remember the words that you've spoken and the concepts and the ideas that you're sharing with us today.
Yeah, as I say, I just want, and we're getting around slowly to Aboriginal people, talking to them about the idea, because if I come out and become the spokesman, there'll be always people criticising me. I'm trying to turn it into a team, not into a
It's better in a team than anyway.
one-man band.
We're more likely to get it done
But
in a team.
unfortunately, someone has to raise it until that becomes a team. I have some good people willing to form, and one person in particular, I've discussed the idea with for a couple of years until I confirm it in my mind. Remember, I say I don't write anything down until I've got exact where I want it. I'm at that point where I think after NAIDOC, and by the way, I am trying to challenge the environment and heritage laws. It's funny, but I'm trying to get Environmental Defender's Office to learn Aboriginal heritage laws, because I think I could combine the court case to prove the point.
Don't give too much away. We're on public testimony.
No, I don't care, who knows, because...
You can all know it's coming, but I don't want the government to know too much.
No, I've always warned people when I'm after something. I've warned government, I've warned organisations, even when they say, oh, you can't do that. I said, well, I just told you I'm going to do it.
Chair-
One example
Oh,
I'll give
sorry,
of that, one day, there was supposed to be this big community meeting on an issue I'd raised, and the people thought they'd won the issue. I went to where they were drinking that night, and I drank and partied, and they come over and go, what are you partying for? I said, because I won tomorrow's fight. I've got the numbers. And they got real upset with me. So I went to the meeting the next day. I said one or two things quite innocently, got attacked. The end of the vote, I won by 10 votes. And I told them that, because I knew if I angered those two, they'd lose 20 votes. So I deliberately went to the pub that night to anger them. All I'm saying, I warned every organisation before I do anything. I have always warned government. You know why? Because I dare you to stop me. I dare you. I don't care what your numbers are. I will dare you to stop me by warning you in advance. I usually find, by the way, then they think I'm up to something real sneaky and dirty. So it's easy to walk
With
those
that
things
warning, Chair, to the government, if it's an appropriate time, I did just want to leave on this note, Uncle, given that after the break, I was going to ask Isabel some
Well,
more
I want
questions.
to leave on the mistakes we make.
Well, I wanted to leave on this note, which was the very sage words of your Chief Parole Officer at the bottom, who has noted that, what was that? Yes, sorry, it is page 87 of Annexure A. And down the very bottom, he notes your current employment, notes that you would also like to work in the Aboriginal Affairs League to promote the interests of his race, brackets. He's a very, very articulate Aboriginal.
Well, actually, that bit about wanting to do Aboriginal was crap. No, can I be honest? There's a lot of stuff they wrote about me that nobody ever asked me. They just wrote it about me. I was already way in front of most people on anthropology and archaeology, but I never mentioned it. So they're making this assumption because I'm always questioning where is my Aboriginality, where is my identity, where is my family. They're assuming, oh mate, if I went through the report and underlined bits and pieces that I would say are actually factual lies, because when you read all the reports where it says, social worker interviewing me, it says a lot of times that I was standoffish or reluctant to talk, and I was only in the room for a minute or two. So most of the conversations don't involve, they are about me, but nobody's asking me. And I don't get it. Everyone, whether it be school reports, whether it be welfare reports, all say I'm intelligent. Well, then why in the hell didn't they ask me what I wanted or why I wanted to? Who knows? Maybe I put that food right next to his flag and the plonk so he'd get the message, not me. Maybe it was time he left.
So if this
Nobody ever asked me.
this is where Dad's gonna
I know I'm going to stop at that,
end
but I
today.
will say,
I do.
I will say,
Can I say this and then you can finish?
yeah, but wait, I will say,
Okay.
we got a few things wrong over the time, and a lot of it was to do with lack of coordination, a lot of it to do with lack of respect by the organisations to the people they're supposed to be representing, because if you put me on a task force to deal with government about some needs, I expect to be talking to someone that is in decision. Instead, the organisations have already had that conversation about someone in decision making, and they're not saying what we want. They're saying what their funding needs are, not my needs, not all my brothers and sisters' needs, not all my friends and their children's needs. No, the organisation's needs. And that is why some organisations don't like me, because I will tell the truth. I'm not the most honest man in the world, but I have nothing to be ashamed of and nothing to hide. And I don't care if people say, did you try and murder people? Yes. I don't care if people say, is it true that you used to get searched for weapons? Yes. Is it true that you used to? Yes. I do not deny anything I've ever done. I do not offer explanations for why I did them or how I did them. I just lived a period where that was the only way. I changed. I learnt to control my temper without the help of government, although it was their responsibility, and I learnt to be able to get things done in the organisations despite the fact that they don't like street people in them. The one they hire usually is one of their family who's going to report to them and try and persuade you to think what the organisations think. I'd use other words, but I won't.
Can I just really quickly do this and then I will let you be the last word?
No, I've got no more.
Well, I just wanted to say, if this is where Dad is ending his oral testimony today, that there are a few things in this document that I just wanted to call attention to for your later reading. Number one, Dad also does talk about deaths in custody. He was involved in the actual commissions of deaths in custody and the lack of counselling, trauma-informed support for everyone involved is something that he talks about, and something that he really wanted to bring up today, just to low-key be like, hey, has it been thought of here too? Because we don't want to repeat the same mistakes that have occurred again. Also, he talks in from Section 80 onwards about his experiences within the health, within the hospitals, GPs, and police. In 83, he talks about the fact that he's still, most recently it was just before the pandemic, because he hasn't really used public transport since the pandemic, but just before the pandemic, Dad was pulled over. So the ongoing harassment by police is still happening for Dad today, and that's in here. Another thing I really wanted to quickly draw attention to is the fact that my father's foster parents refused, there was a deliberate decision not to leave him money because, and it's in here, and Ms Noakes talks about it, she didn't believe Aboriginal people could manage money. But there's also a piece of land that Dad was promised, which is actually, turns out it was our clan land. It was in Wandong, and Mr Noakes made no will. He made no will, and at the time, and he told this to Dad, but he'd also told it to Melva, to Dad's mum. And at the time,
He also,
and I'm choosing to speak out about injustice, racism and harsh treatment. What she testifies in the Coranderrk inquiry was not the sum of her and my Uncle David's story. She was so much more than the words captured in a process created by a culture that was not her own, as too am I. Larry Walsh.
And I should say, in the same way that during your father's evidence today, you've been able to add things, I would hope that, Uncle Larry, you also feel free to submit any additional testimony this afternoon after the break.
I feel that I'd rather my daughter talk, because one of the problems over deaths in custody and stolen kids I kept raising that nobody took notice was how many of our children, whether it be deaths in custody children, whether it be stolen gens children, are suffering and no one's doing anything about it, and the government is trying to deny it because we raised it at that advisory, and it was one of the first things the government knocked back.
But Sarala, Dad and I have a pretty good relationship, so if he thinks I've said something that's wrong, he'll let us know, won't you?
All I'm saying is that from my perspective, the young haven't had a chance to have a say on what they need so that we can break this cycle. And I am going back to fight things my way because I've tried the establishment way. It fails because they write the rules. And I am better at breaking rules. So I want to go back to that because it's the only way I see that we can force the government to do what's needed. Oh, by the way, if any politicians listening, I know the 5 factional heads. Labor.
I don't.
So I know which officers, Labor, I will be targeting.
Is that a good time, Chair?
Yes, thank you. Thank
The
you.
Court of Justice
Thank you.
Commission is now adjourned until 3:35.
3:35. How long does that give us?
10.
Now,
Session.
Isabel, you've already taken the oath and you've already provided some evidence, including you've provided a witness statement of Alert Kitchara, and I'd just like to confirm that the contents of that are correct, are truthful.
Yep. All
and-
accurate and truthful.
And at the end, I will tender that along with your father's witness statement. So all of that will go in as evidence.
Yep.
One of the things that I wanted to pick up on in that is you were very respectful of the process and the fact that at the moment we're in the process of gathering evidence from elders. And at paragraph 30, you've noted that you have more to say. Your testimony in that statement is support for your father's experience, because you're conscious that you're sitting inside the elders part of this process. But we are very interested to know about those intergenerational impacts, and I would be really pleased if you would discuss. You've talked about your sister, your community, your family, and you all fighting a lot of the same battles as each other because of your father's disenfranchisement. And if there was anything else you wanted to say on that issue.
Yeah, so before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge how privileged I am to speak here today. You know, I'm on a beautiful Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country, which has always kept me safe. And I'm grateful to the country spirits, the traditional owners who look after this country spirits, because I've always been safe on this land globally. And my father asked me to join him through this process. It's been going on for us for a couple of weeks, months really. And he was feeling more and more disenfranchised, but also he felt like it wasn't really him. So there was that, but then also the other thing is my father, and the reason I feel I have to acknowledge him before I sort of get into it, is a lot of my testimony and a lot of what this talks about is really intensely personal. We're talking about trauma that was handed to me by someone I love, despite him not wanting to, not knowing how not to. You know, we're talking about a man who has knowingly handed trauma to me and not known how to not. And, you know, there would have been a time period 10 years ago when my father couldn't, you know, I would have had to wait till he passed. And I know that there are many in my generation that are actually in that position, that they have to wait for their loved ones to pass in order to talk about these uncomfortable things. But, you know, my father asked me to do this because, you know, a lot of what's been happening with my life and health journey, you know, mental health journey, Dad and I recently got the same diagnosis of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And, sorry, I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. My father has post-traumatic stress syndrome. I believe they're the same thing, but we have two different psychs, so whatever.
No, it's simple. I'm going for the...
You're not on the mic.
I'm going for Army one.
Yes, my father, look, they consider us, they handle us differently because I'm in a, they handle our treatment differently because I'm in a sexually violent a trauma healing program, and my father is currently, there's no sort of equivalent for stolen generations, so they're putting him in with the army vets and treating him the way they would an army vet. Anyway, through that process, and this is super deeply uncomfortable for me to talk about publicly. It's not something that I ever have really talked about publicly. You know, but through that process and through my family beginning to understand my panic attacks and, you know, I mean, if you Google complex post-traumatic stress disorder, you'll basically get what's going on behind closed doors that you don't see. And my father, there was a great level of humility actually in him. It didn't come from me. I didn't say, you did this to me, you, mum, anyone. He said, I am seeing in you things that I feel and felt. And it means that it is continuing and continuing on in the generations. So he wanted to provide this platform to attempt to stop this intergenerational path trauma handing on happening. And the easiest way I can sort of describe it, because I worked for a long time in Museums Victoria, so I'm very intimately familiar with their Victorian collection, in particular the photographs. And I know that Museums Victoria, a state institution, has a photograph every generation from my apical ancestors down to me. Every single one of us is photographed down my line in that museum institution. You know, the information that's been gathered on us by the state, and actually the documentation, and I worked at that institution on projects on massacres, on all sorts of different things. So I was able to document 6 generations of discrimination to be passed down through the generations, and ultimately the end result is that nothing is changing. We're still facing the same battles. And so I just wanted to acknowledge Dad, because he's had to humble himself to allow me to give this testimony at all. And I also wanted to acknowledge my mother, for she too has to, she too, even though she's not Indigenous, has to humble herself to hear this testimony. You know, I suppose for me, the effects of growing up as a child of a stolen man, there are many, but I do know and I can see that many of my fears, which people see as irrational, such as hospitals and doctors, which have prevented me from getting health care. You know, my father's fear of hospitals, which has been reinforced time and time again by racialised treatment inside them, has then come to me, and then I've had racialised treatment inside them. And then it's gotten to the point where now, because I am so traumatised by that experience, I don't want to present unless it's too late. I nearly had a miscarriage that was, like, I did have a miscarriage that was nearly too late because I was so reluctant to present.
Isabel, when you talk about racialised treatment, there's a really particular example you've spoken to me about in the past about your father presenting with quite significant symptoms. Can you just
So
talk
recently, so in the last, actually we're currently going through a complaint system with Bendigo Health at the moment. The complaint's been ongoing for 7 months and we're still waiting for feedback from them. But about 7 months ago, my father, longer actually, because the complaint would have come after the incident, Dad and I'd moved up to Bendigo and Dad was living on his own. And he called me up one day and he was like, Bella, I think I need to come and stay with you for a bit. You know, and it was like a year and a half into the pandemic at this stage. So he'd been alone for a year. So it was like, oh, yeah, okay. And then he got up to my house and really quickly it became really clear that he was sick. And within 2 weeks, you know, we'd been back in touch with, we share a GP, or we did. And that's because the reason is because we don't trust doctors, and we've found a GP that we trust with our life, and we follow her everywhere she goes. And so we went, because we're frightened to present to hospitals, and we knew my father was sick, we thought we'll go to our GP first. And she did all the appropriate kind of testing and actually found out, like because you can tell through bloods if someone has pancreatitis, which is an inflammation of the pancreas, and you can also tell, or there's indicative features through blood work that can be done for gallstones. And she'd basically found out, our GP, that Dad had gallstones and it was likely to be leading to a pancreatitis attack. So she advised us as soon as he had a pancreatitis attack to present to emergency, and that she had forwarded ahead the file to Bendigo Health Hospital emergency so that they knew what was going on. When we got there 3 days later, when Dad did have an immediate pancreatitis attack, we were asked 15 times in emergency, my father and I, if he was an alcoholic. I replied, and well, first off, I let my father reply because I don't speak for him other than when I need to advocate for him because things are outrageous. And he said, no, I haven't had a drink since the grand final, and I had 2 drinks at the grand finals. And I know this to be true because he was with me. Like, he'd been in my house in the pandemic between then and then, you know. So I knew because I was the one who drank the actual 4 that made up the 6-pack. So, like, I know he drank 2. And so Dad said, no, I haven't had a drink for months. And then they came to me. Then they waited till Dad sort of wasn't engaged, and then they were like, you know, is your father an alcoholic? Is he here looking for, you know, drugs of some kind? And I was like, no, he's not. We're pretty sure he has gallstones that are causing this pancreatitis. Like the doctor said, he hasn't had a drink for 3 or 4 months. Then they called my sister up because she was listed. I'm listed as his next of kin, and like, because I live with him, and so to make immediate decisions if necessary. But we always list my sister as like a backup emergency contact, and like you know, she needs to be informed because, yeah, you know, we're equals. We're equals. And they called my sister up, who was with my mum at the time, and they asked her, is Larry an alcoholic? Is he drinking alcohol? You know, the assumption then, the bloods came back, and yeah, he was having a huge pancreatitis attack. His pancreas was inflamed, his liver was inflamed, and he had gallstones. And the 2 most common causes of liver and pancreas inflammation are gallstones or alcohol. So despite the fact that he clearly had the gallstones, they didn't want it, you know, whatever. So we knew Dad needed his gallbladder out. They moved him into fast track for surgery. At that point, they kicked me out of the hospital because we were no longer in emergency care. And you're not allowed, in the pandemic, you weren't allowed people in the wards with you. At this point, somehow the hospital lost my dad's filing system twice and left him there in a room for 4 days with no food, no water, waiting for emergency surgery.
And Isabel, what was the reason he was not getting any food or water?
They say because he lost his files.
The real reason was I was supposed to operate every day, so I wasn't allowed to eat.
So he's nil by mouth because he was waiting operation, but somehow surgical didn't talk to emergency, didn't talk to ward staff, so it wasn't booked, and no one followed this up despite the fact that I was calling. And every time we called, they would just fob us off and ask again about alcohol. So we have some pretty clear assumptions about what's going on there, and the fact that they haven't replied to us in our complaint through their formalised complaint system. But this stuff happens repeatedly. You know, my father, he looks a little homeless sometimes, and I don't mean that negatively. That's like, he likes to dress a bit street.
That's the way I am.
He likes to dress a bit urban, and you know, people, and then he gets into a health position where they make immediate assumptions about the drugs that he must be on, and what he wants, and then the standard of care we get is less. And I have to push. I now have to attend. The reason I am my father's carer and attend to his doctor's appointments is because a doctor does not take my father seriously. And it makes me so angry because why does a light-skinned, why is it a 30-year-old light-skinned woman is worth listening to more about someone else's body than the human themselves, you know? But that's why I go with Dad, because quite often Dad will be trying to say something and people will just ignore him and talk to me about his healthcare. Blows my mind.
Isabel, there's one other thing that I do want to address before the chair needs to leave, and it's a relatively similar incident with the police where, yet again...
Yeah, I did want to talk about this incident, actually. Yeah. Because the reason I wanted to talk about this incident is because I wanted to show that, I mean, we know people are still dying in custody. We're currently going through Auntie Veronica Nelson's inquiry, and I didn't know her. Great respect to that family. We have certainly been thinking about you all as this process has been taking place. But I actually did want to tell a story, which is a sensitive story in our family. But one day my sister was arrested, and she was arrested for drunken disorderly, as they love to arrest Aboriginal women for. And they picked her up at Moonee Ponds, and
No, they picked her up at Broadmeadows and took her to Moonee.
no, they took her to Moonee Ponds. Anyway, I was working. I was at the museum. I was doing a tour, actually, so I had no phone with me, nothing. And so I'll tell you from my perspective, and then I'll sort of... So I finished working. I'd been working for about 3 hours. I got to my phone. There were 17 missed calls on my phone. And they'd all come from Mum and Dad. Mum was currently in regional Victoria. So I knew something was wrong. And I finally got through to Dad. And Dad was like, you need to come down to the Moonee Ponds police station. I am here. And all I could hear on the phone was this wailing and screaming in the background. And I could tell my father was frightened as well. So I immediately left the tour group I was with, and I was actually with a group of my, kind of family. I left them immediately, and I went down to Moonee Ponds Police Station, and it just so happened to be at the time I was not only studying law, I was also working for the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service as a client services officer. So I was one of the people who was frontline for when an Aboriginal person was arrested. So I was able to pretty quickly determine that things were not going as they should have gone when I arrived. It turns out that my father had been sitting in, so it turns out then I arrived and I got told by the police officers, while I could hear my sister hysterically screaming from the back of the lockup, I was told by the police officers, your sister has cut herself. We have strip searched her, but there was a weapon and she's managed to cut herself and there is blood over the cells. That is all I was told. And then I said, why haven't you what has she been charged on? And they said, nothing. She's being held for drunk and disorderly. And I said, where's the D20? Which is the initial contacting form that a police officer has to fill out when they arrest an Aboriginal person to contact VALS. And they could not produce a D20 because none had been produced. And then they were like, why are you asking about the D20? And I was like, because I work for the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service. Oh, hi, are you Phil from the cells? I'm Isabel from VALS. By that stage, my father had been sitting there, and when I walked in, I will never forget this, and it's something actually my dad writes in here. He writes in here that the police tried to criminalise, humiliate, and beat him, and they were only successful at 2 of those, criminalising and beating him. They never humiliated him, but this day was the closest I think I've ever seen my father to being humiliated by the police. He was sitting like such a good little boy, sorry, now this is going to make me cry. That 8-year-old little boy that you saw is who I saw sitting in that police station. And he'd been sitting there for 3 hours while the police refused, and he was my sister's next of kin at the time and lived with her. I didn't live with her, and I was 23. And they refused to give her to him and refused to charge her. So I rock up and I start getting quite angry and being like, where's the D20? Where's this? I've called VALS. They're expecting you to call, like, a representation, you to call. They decided at some point that they would allow me to go and see my sister because she was still screaming. So I walked back to the cells, and I suppose many black families will relate to this. I immediately turned to her and went, shut the fuck up. She immediately shut the fuck up, which I was very grateful of. And then because I scared them, because I was a staff member at the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service and I worked on the front end of that service, they decided that they would release her to me, not to her next of kin, to a 23-year-old who had no licence, who had no identification on her, just a smart mouth and light skin. The reason I bring this story up, and this is like, I had to ask Hannah's permission because, like, shame job, right? I don't actually think it's shame job. I don't actually think it's shame job because what happened to her is she got arrested. In her perspective, she was drunk. They strip searched her. She got distressed. She began to get distressed and hid out things and then hurt herself. And then the reason I bring this up is because the same deaths in custody issue that Dad faced with his brother actually dying in custody, here, 30 years later, he was listening to what he thought was his daughter dying in custody. She was, same as the 2 aunts whose inquests are just happening now, Hannah was openly told by the police, to her family, that she had open wounds on her body and had harmed herself in there, and yet no medical evaluation had taken place of her, nor did it take place of her. They just released her into my custody and were like, go. Once I'd been like, where's an ME? Where's a report telling me, like, where's she cut herself? Why is there blood on the cell walls? I still, to this day, do not have answers about that. And, it's also terrifies the shit out of my sister now. If she ever gets arrested, if she ever gets in any trouble with the police, they are going to strip search her because she's been found, because she's cut herself before in there.
And Isabel, that's because she now has a weapons flag against her name.
And it's all because we don't come from a culture that actually believes in imprisoning people. If you actually look traditionally at Tamarang traditional law, you would die before you would be imprisoned. And I understand this is a very different cultural notion. And I'm not trying to say our cultural notion, we should, revert back 100%. But I am trying to say locking someone up has a different effect on a culture that has a different relationship with freedom and freedom of movement. Freedom of movement is a major thing. And when Hannah lost her freedom of movement, even if it was justifiable for a small moment, which I don't think drunkenness ever is, but whatever, even if it was justifiable for a small moment, if it then gets to the point that that person's escalating, screaming, cutting themselves, trying to harm themselves against police cell walls, doing nothing is not an option. And I'm sorry, we are talking about 4 to 5 years ago. We're not talking about historic old events that make us all feel nice. In terms of Dad being picked on by police, I still, this is my privilege. My privilege is that I'm light-skinned and I don't get picked up by police unless I'm with my cousins or my family. And I watched PSOs recently. We were at a train station in North Melbourne and these PSOs stopped and they didn't see, I was down away from my dad, I was getting us a Coke from the vending machine, so they thought he was alone. And
I was catching a train up the bush.
And they thought he was alone. And so they walked up to him, PSOs, at North Melbourne Station, and they said, "Where's your ticket, sir?" And Dad was like, oh, what? Oh, okay. Pulls out his Mikey. And they're just holding the Mikey. And I walk up and I'm like, "Excuse me, why have you asked him for his ticket?" And they're like, "It's none of your business. We're checking this man's ticket." I'm like, "Where's your ticket checker? Where's your Mikey inspector? Because I know what they look like, believe it or not. I've been fined before for not doing the right thing, so I know acutely what they look like." And he was like, "What do you mean?" I'm just asking him where they would not let it go. And it got to the point where I was having a go at them, being like, "Are you really harassing this old man?" He then got on, luckily his V-line came, and that's where we were splitting up, was North Melbourne Station. So the PSOs left us alone for a while, but then he got on the V-line, and then the PSOs made a direct B-line down towards me. And luckily a train pulled in and I was able to get on that, and the train wasn't going to where I was going, but I just caught it. This stuff happens also after, post-pandemic. We were moving through the city, and there was, remember that brief moment where there was like the African gang violence? And I don't say African gang violence because it's like, why do you need to label it African? The other gang that they were fighting was a white gang, but we didn't need to italicize and racialize them. They're just youngsters, probably dickheads, but whatever. They're just youngsters. Anyway, that whole, the gang thing was going on in the city at the middle after the pandemic, and they were doing those random stops at the police station, at the Flinders Street station, where they can randomly just check that you've not got a weapon or rah. And they were letting hundreds and hundreds of people stream past them. And actually, it wasn't me with Dad at this time, it was Hannah and some of Hannah's colleagues, but they were behind. And they stopped Dad, searched Dad. This is what I don't understand. Here is a man with a crippling shoulder injury. Look at him. Is this the threat? Is this the threat you are looking for when you are looking for youth gang violence in town? I don't think so.
I think I'm a bit too old to be.
I mean, it got to the point that two of Hannah's non-Indigenous colleagues stopped and said, "Why are you doing this to this old man? What threat does he pose?" So this stuff is still occurring today.
Commissioners, I wanted to make
Can
sure...
I
Uncle,
say something?
Yeah.
That Isabel mentions the police station. They asked me to leave, but no.
Yeah, they did ask him to leave for
I
Hannah.
refused to because, yes,
He thought he was listening to his daughter die. Can you imagine that?
they wouldn't let me have her.
Uncle, I wanted
Yeah,
to
I'm just
make
saying
sure the
from what
commissioners get a
Isabel
chance.
said.
Yes.
That what a lot of people don't understand is that they tried to get me out of the police station. I refused to leave because I'm not going to let my kid die. That was a fear. If Isabel hadn't arrived, I may have...
But I
I
did.
was thinking about taking the law into my own hands.
But I did, and we got our girl back, and she's perfectly fine.
Commissioners, were there any questions that you wanted to ask? of either Uncle Larry or Isabel from their evidence today?
No, I don't have anything other than to say thank you for sharing, and it's been difficult and hard, and particularly you, Uncle Larry, of just coming forward. And I, you know, I don't want to use the word brave. I think courageous is more the word, and I know you're a very private man, so I want to thank you for behalf of the commissioners, but also myself personally. So
Yeah, now don't forget, we still got to discuss Ned Kelly.
Yeah, there is one other thing I wanted to add, which is that there was no scope thus far because I was sitting here to support my father to talk about this. But I also wanted to speak about racialised violence that I've experienced as an Aboriginal woman inside my own community. Because I think this is actually an area that we need to discuss more for Aboriginal women.
Isabel, the chair's going to leave. And
That's
just-
okay. I just want to say this, and
Yeah.
Aniesme can leave, but I just need to say that there have been instances for me that have actually been documented, and currently an Aboriginal Green senator totes around this elder as though they are actually an elder. But there is an elder out there who is actually, because I am a Tanwurrung woman who was involved with my nation group, I've actually had my name and address written on their Facebook telling their young men in their family to come and visit me. I've had, because I stand up often in the positions that I do stand up with, and I am my father's daughter, I have had many, many instances where people put me down or are rude. Thank you, Aunt. But I'm not going to go into it any further, but I really hope that throughout this process there is scope to discuss the violence that is also happening internally within our community, because if it doesn't stop and the women aren't starting, you know, if you're not going to stand with us women, then why the fuck should us women continue standing with you men?
First of all, thank you, Aniela.
Thank you, Auntie Eleanor, we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And travel safe.
My apologies.
Got to do what you got to do.
Thank you, Councillor.
On what Isabel is saying is that there was this one family in particular who were using Facebook to bully people they didn't know or like. When they picked on my children and my tribe, I went them.
I know, and the other thing I'll say on the record,
necessarily-
there is a whole word currently used within the Victorian Aboriginal community for my tribe, and it is so disgusting that it is used. Tanawronga. The idea that I and another Aboriginal person would boil me down to one part, one simple fact, which is exactly where my land lies, and then make assumptions about all my politics, whom I am, whether I deserve to have land claims or not, whether I deserve to have a forum or not, whether Tanwurrung people are welcome here or not, whether we're greedy or grab hungry, whether I'm involved in the corporation or not, it doesn't matter. And we need to get to a point within Aboriginal Australia, again, where we are standing with one another, because that is when we're strong. That is when we're strong, and it's currently, you'll note, I think, I can notice right now there's been division within our community, and you can see it because our community is standing more alone than they have in a very long time.
An example of that was I Facebook back the person.
Which is sad, because I used to call them uncle.
A failed leader who's bitter because of it, and that's the truth. A failed leader who's bitter because of it, abusing people because they didn't agree with his abuse. So yeah, I had a go at him, and I also told some of his family who were passing on these messages that they were enabling violence, so some of them withdrew from it. And then the rest of them threatened they were going to get me.
I know.
So, wait.
No,
let me
but that's the
finish.
thing that shits me so much is when people were violent to me as a young woman and a young Aboriginal woman by other Aboriginal people in my 20s, and I raised it with my leadership and eldership in community, what happened? But they went after my eldership. Disgusting. Disgusting.
So,
Uncle, I
No,
want to give
I'm gonna
the,
finish.
I know the commissioners
Yeah, but
probably
wait,
have questions.
so,
Councillor, I'm just conscious
Yep.
that
yeah,
the
but I'm
chair
just
has
going to
left.
say this.
Yes.
So, they changed their attention to me. I just gave them a few stories that they know they heard about me,
Thanks, Daddy.
to say, don't threaten me or my children ever again. The fact that as a parent, and here's the joke, none of the other parents stood up for their kids. You know why? They were bloody scared. I'm sick and tired of, I'm too old to keep standing up against them. I'm sick and tired of people hiding instead of joining forces and say, piss off, you failed, stop picking on everyone. I do not see some of their supporters as a problem. I
Councillor,
just see that this really big thing in Aboriginal world
So,
Daddy,
Uncle,
I really
Uncle,
sound tough.
Councillor, I think we need to acknowledge that the chair has left. This is not the last occasion that we can speak with this family. And because I haven't had the opportunity to thank you, Isabel, for giving evidence, I want to thank you. You spoke with enormous power.
Thank you.
And I hope it's not the last time that we hear from you. You've got an enormous amount to share with us in addition to what you already have in support of your father.
Thank you.
And again, Uncle Larry, thank you. Courageous is the word I would use.
No.
The last thing we wanted to do was say thank you to everyone who had helped us do this. There were so many lawyers, solicitors who helped us with our words. There were so many people who checked in via text. Sue-Ann, I really appreciated that. I know Brendan did as well. So I really appreciate everyone who is involved in the commission and the efforts that they put in helping us put this together. It was a really hard process for us, and it wouldn't have happened without that support. And in particular, I suppose, Sorella, for me, you were the face. So I really, it meant a lot to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think we need to...
Yeah, let's end that.
all right?
That's it, Dad.
Well,
Next Kelly.
we can still have,
Next
I
Kelly.
should say though, Uncle, every single thing that you've said in your witness statement is evidence in this Royal Commission.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you've said
Well-
it beautifully
Well,
in
I just
your
want
fellow
I
Kitchara.
just want it recorded. I just want it recorded. My mother's nickname was Kate because of that story that goes in my family.
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Kate,
Now, you've got some tendering to...
I do.
Yeah.
I need to tender to the Deputy Chair the exhibits. Now that we mentioned those exhibits, I should tender them so that evidence is in. I would like to tender the Blurt Kitchara of Uncle Larry Walsh, dated the 19th of May, in its redacted form. It'll be published as exhibit number 7, and it has with it exhibits 7.1, which is a very large annexure, which we will, Commissioners, with your permission, review for Uncle Larry's personal information that might be harmful if it were out. There's a really large amount of information.
That would be wonderful.
We will check birthdays, addresses and those things. So that, with your permission...
Council, I've had the opportunity to read that body of work, which is quite extensive, over 200 pages. It almost all concerns personal information in relation to Uncle Larry, and I wonder whether it might not be better to mark that confidential at this stage, during the review process.
If the Commissioners are amenable, I'd be indebted at this stage, and then we could carefully review.
I think we would prefer that, Dad. Yeah.
yeah, but I would prefer if, when you investigate the Kelly story.
If anything
I'd
comes
like
to the
to go.
Kelly story, Dad wants in. All right, everyone.
No, because is it a myth or is it the truth?
And Uncle Larry, I can speak to you once we finish these proceedings. We can have a quick chat about that, and we can then I can talk to the other commissioners as well.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I would also like to tender exhibits 7.2, 3 and 4, which are each photographs that we've shown today. And then finally, as Exhibit 8, the Balokachara of Isabel Papajaruk Morphy Walsh, dated the 20th of May 2022, this very day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Council, and thank you again. And those gifts are from the Commission for coming, and
you.
also for your support, people. I have some clapsticks as well for yours.
Oh, that would
So,
be really lovely.
thank you
And
very
I'd like
much.
to thank you for inviting this, because
Yeah, I'm done.
I feel by allowing myself and my family together to talk, we're hoping that it opens the door for other family groups to talk, because I think individual thing is good, but sometimes we forget the effects that happened to me also happened to my children.
Yeah, kudos, because he didn't want to get up without us, so thank you.
So thank you very much for that.
Justice